Good morning. This is Wayne Cameron again to continue my series of solving problems on the trumpet. Today we're going to discuss something that might be a little sensitive to some of you, but it's how to gain confidence as a player, especially as a young player. Um, if you're an older, experienced trumpet player, then you probably already dealt with most of what I'm going to talk about today, but you may get some insight into how to help your students if you have a large studio. So the first thing that you have to realize is that being a perfectionist is a mental illness. I can say that because I'm a perfectionist, and it's a mental illness. And if you're constantly trying to be perfect, you'll be constantly failing. Now that sounds like I'm trying to lower standards, but in reality, I'm not. Once you stop worrying about being perfect and just play with what I call reckless abandon, not reckless carelessness, but reckless abandon, your playing goes up in astronomical numbers, okay? Now, we have to admit honestly, and this is hard for most people to admit, that we like for everyone to love everything we do. I do, you do. All humans want their friends and neighbors to think everything they do is wonderful. As a trumpet player, you want everyone to think that every note you play is a golden tone from God. Well, that's never going to happen. And if you don't accept that, you'll have a nervous breakdown. Now, it's just a human condition. Now, the only person in your life that's going to love everything you do is probably your mother. But that doesn't count. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, how to dealing with perfection, one of the first things that you encounter as a young player are recordings. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of value in listening to other trumpet players. However, the problem arises when recordings are always perfect. And they've been perfect for a very long time, not just since we have all this digital stuff. Way back when they were made perfect, when they used to cut the recording tape with a razor blade and glue it together with Scotch tape. They could put one note in if you missed it, and it was perfect. I got insight into this back in the early 60s when I was working on the Hummel Trumpet Concerto, and there was one recording by Armando Guitarra, who was first trumpet in the Boston Symphony. And I listened to that and I almost wept, hoping I'd ever be able to play that as perfectly as he played it. However, in reading the record jacket on the back, I discovered something that gave me a shock. The recording engineer was talking about how wonderful Guitarra was, and this is the important part of his statement. He said, "We only had to record it 5 times." Well, I never heard of that. I mean, I thought you just played it and it was one take and it was great. Here's this guy saying, "Oh, we only had to record it 5 times. He's such a great player." Well, all of a sudden, my idea of perfection flipped upside down. Now, I'm not saying great players can't play perfectly. What I'm saying is that perfection is not only just getting every note right. There are so many things that you could use and claim is not perfect. Like for instance, let's say you play a concert and you play every note correctly. But then you listen to that and you say, "Oh, well, I didn't taper this phrase the way I wanted to. I clipped into this phrase. This note was a little out of tune. This rhythm was rushed a little bit." I mean, the possibilities of imperfection are limitless. Limitless. You understand what I'm saying? Now, I'm not going to give you names, but I will tell you without qualification. Some of our greatest players on trumpet in the 20th century, I've either heard in person or heard recordings, live recordings of, or reports from other qualified people who heard these people play and crash and burn. Now, I'm not going to give you names, but if you call me personally, I'll tell you, and you'd be shocked. Great players crashing and burning. Al Vizzuti said at a workshop that I went to that you could play the trumpet every day for 35 years and pick it up one day and feel like you never played in your whole life. Well, if that happened to fall on a day of a major performance, then you're not going to be satisfied with your performance. So if when you're performing, you're constantly worrying about every little nuance, every little cracked note, every little whatever it is, you'll be a nervous wreck. You'll never gain any confidence. Now, let's talk about how to really gain confidence. That first part was about what could possibly be coloring your idea of what you're looking for as a player. The first thing, and I was guilty of this, I'll be honest with you, is playing in public pieces that are beyond your experience level. Now, what I mean by that is, I'll give you a perfect example in my own development. When I was in the 10th grade, I was working on the Haydn Trumpet Concerto. You all know that piece. It's a wonderful piece, and I could play it beautifully in my bedroom with the door shut. Had no trouble. So I got all puffed up, thinking I'm wonderful. Then I got invited to play for a music club in our local town, and I crashed and burned. I mean, I missed enough notes in that piece to play another piece with. Now, how did that happen? Because I had no experience playing that level of music in front of an audience. The fact that I could play it in my bedroom is totally irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. You take 1 foot on stage, your heartbeats start beating like a bass drum. Your mouth is so dry you can strike a match on your tongue. Your brain feels like scrambled eggs, and you think you're going to play a piece at that level where you've never even come close to playing a piece like that before. I mean, come on, man. You probably believe that aliens live across the street. Now, here's what you have to do. And this is what I did with me, and it's what I do with my students. To build confidence, you have to have solid performances. Not performances that you got to the very last note by luck, and you know if you had played one more note, the game would be up. You need to pick pieces to play in public when you're young that you could play if you're in a coma. Pieces that you could play under the worst case scenarios, that you are in absolute control of that piece, so that when you walk off stage, that was a solid performance. Now, I'm going to have several of these discussions, so I'm not going to go into that part, but I will a little bit later on in another session. So then what you do is you have to play that piece more than once. You find everywhere you can get to play in front of people. Bring your friends home from school, have your family get in the family room, make it really formal, play that piece in front of people as many times as possible. Now here's what happens. The first time you play the piece, you find out where you should have worked harder. The second time you play it, you check to see if those places have improved. The third time you play it, you ought to be getting pretty comfortable with it. And the fourth, fifth, sixth, 8, 10 times you played it, it becomes what I call your piece. You could play it under any circumstances. Then you move on to another piece, maybe a half a step higher. Do you understand? Now, it takes a strong ego to do this, because we want to play the highest, the fastest, the hardest piece we can possibly play, so that everyone says how wonderful we are. Well, that's all fine and good if you have ice water in your veins and you've never had dry mouth. However, to build confidence on a solid foundation, you need to gradually build up and play pieces with progressing difficulties to where they're absolutely solid. And don't just play it one time. Don't just play it. All the great soloists, I mean, how many times you think Maurice Andre played the Haydn Trumpet Concerto? Probably 1,000. I played the Artunian Trumpet Concerto. I mean, in one season, I played it 15 times. I could play the Artunian on 2 days' notice because I played it so many times. I knew where all the pitfalls were. I knew where I could relax. I knew where I had to pay attention. This is only gained in front of an audience. It is not gained in the practice room. It is gained in front of people. So you play gradually more difficult pieces as you go up. And always expect to maybe have a couple flaws. Now, I used to play a trick on when I was active. I'm retired, you know that. I used to play a trick mental game that, let's say I was playing a concerto, any concerto, okay? I would spot myself a certain number of mistakes to make. I mean, overt mistakes, like cracking a note or something like that. I'd spot myself one note per movement. But you have no idea how much pressure that takes off of you, because now you said, okay, I know I'm human. I know I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to allow myself a certain number of mistakes. And you'd be surprised how much that takes a lot of pressure off of you. I even went so far when I was in college. I had a church gig, and my trumpet teacher went to this church. And I planned in advance, in the prelude to that church service, I was going to miss the first note on purpose. I even put down the wrong buttons, and I splattered that note all over that church. It was incredible because this sense of relaxation swept over me. I couldn't believe it. I played the rest of the piece beautifully. It's almost like when you get a new car and you're afraid you're going to get a dent in it. Just take a hammer and put a dent in it, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Then you don't park 2 miles away in a parking lot so nobody will scratch your car. It's almost the same thing. Just accept that you might make an error. Don't worry about it. The world's not going to come to an end. These people that I talked about earlier, great players who crashed and burned on recitals, I'm not saying that and degrading their ability. I'm just saying they're human beings. I mean, it didn't diminish my respect for them at all. It just proved that they're like everybody. So that's my first introductory thing. The next couple times will be about some physical things that you really have to have in control. But don't forget, recordings are very valuable, but you must never judge your performance on a recording. I'll see you next time.